Maybe settings. Reconnect your HTML. So, hello folks. We still have some kind of technical issues. Sorry. Luckily, we had just muted the audio right now.
It's all right. Can you share your screen? Cool. No. That's the HDMI. Just get on and try it also. You could follow the screen on the. We will have to, I reckon. Yeah. Just all put our volume down and just log into. I'm really sorry about this. It's fine. You're not the first to experience problems with the for example. Maybe. I mean, this is just a low grade.
Moment, I've blocked the water. So, if anyone's coming.
So is there projector or anything like that? So I have it has worked for me before.
It's just this thing.
Oh, it's this one. Fine.
So, Hello, back again. I guess we found a solution.
Maybe.
Can you take the thing with the, if you found this?
Just a patch. Yeah. Fancy. Okay.
What is it?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. I don't want to do, if you want me to.
This is definitely not gonna work. You just have to.
But I want a second screen to share.
You should be able to share a screen there.
So you should now have my slides.
Did you send them to me?
No, I mean my shared screen.
No, you don't share screen currently.
Yeah, because the cable was unplugged.
Okay. Can I introduce you?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome for those of you who are online and for the few people here in the room with us. It's a great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Albrecht Kurze, who is with us here in the room today, who will present on IoT-related research. And we will have the chance to also ask Albrecht questions at the end. I switched on the audio transcription function, which hopefully enables anyone who may have connection problems or can't hear properly to follow the recording. This is also live streamed on YouTube, and we will also record the session locally just to be safe. I
Recording in progress.
Welcome to the interconnected office environment. Albrecht, thank you so much for being here. Albrecht is visiting us from the University of Chemnitz, where he works under the chair of media informatics and has really great project on miteinander, nebeneinander, which is in German, like kind of together next to each other, although I don't know how you're going to translate it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's close, yes.
Yeah. And Albrecht will speak for the next like 30-40 minutes, and then we go into Q&A. So Albrecht, the floor is yours.
Yeah, it's not really a Q&A. What I've planned is more like a really discussion, but let's start with what I've planned as agenda. So first, a short introduction. Hello again from me. I'm Albrecht. I will introduce a little bit about where I came from. Then I will tell you about the motivation for our HCI-driven research on the IoT. I will go a little bit deeper on the data-driven interaction research we have performed, and I will present some findings, two-folded, first on how users make sense of sensor data, and then how they make use of sensor data, and what also leads to surveillance. And then there comes the discussion part where we'll present somehow provocative or even wicked implications for privacy that we found with our research. And then we'll come to a conclusion where I give a short outlook and present some takeaways. So Chemnitz, where I'm from, is a medium-sized town in Germany with a population of around 250,000 people, and it's about 200 kilometers south of Berlin. And Chemnitz itself has some kind of a little bit weird history, because it was even renamed during GDR times when Germany was separated in eastern and western part, and then it was called Karl-Marx-Stadt, in English something like Karl-Marx City, to honor the philosopher and communist thinker Karl Marx. And so besides the name change, Chemnitz also famous for its really huge portrait bust of Karl Marx. It's the second largest in the world. It's 13 meters high, height. And if you want to see the largest one, you have to go to Siberia. So maybe it's just good enough to see the second largest one. And another thing you should know about Chemnitz is that it will be the European capital of culture in 2025, so in 3 years. Maybe a good reason and time to come for a visit to Chemnitz. And Chemnitz is also the place where my university is. It's called Chemnitz University of Technology, or in short, in German, TU Chemnitz. It was founded 1836, so 10 years after the UCL was founded, but it's much smaller in comparison. So we have around 10,000 students and around 2,300 members of staff. You can study 97 degree programs. And if you want to know more, come to our homepage. Just a few words about me. So I have a background in computer science, and after I have done my diploma in computer science, I worked for a short period of time in industry, and then I have gone back to university to work as a research assistant, first on multimedia systems and IP networks, and then I did my PhD. And in my PhD, I researched the relationship of quality of service, network parameters if you want, and quality of experience, how satisfied users are with mobile services. And I created a testbed for this purpose and performed a big lab study with nearly 300 participants to get this mapping from QoS to QoE. In 2015, I finished my PhD, and then I joined as a postdoc the project Miteinander. And with this project, my focus shifted a little bit away from the networks, more to the human-computer interaction side. And our project Miteinander, that's the German word for together, is a project that brought together competences and perspectives from computer science, from design, but also from social sciences. The project already started in 2014 and is right now ending this month. So it was quite a long-running project. We got a prolongation granted, and it's a little bit exceptional to have a project for 8 years. And the project started with a motto. We design and develop for the Internet of Things, user-centric, participatory, and critical. And this is quite good representing our HCI-driven approach for the IoT, mainly in the home. And this brings us directly to our main research interest between the intersection of IoT and human-computer interaction. So let's start with a model of the IoT. It's adapted from the Eclipse Foundation and very simplified, of course. We have, of course, the network there with platform for big data and for connected smart things. And we have some kind of front ends there, user interfaces, and of course, the user. Even if it's the Internet of Things, the user is still important there. And we have the sensors and actuators and all the interactions that we are interested in. Interactions of the things with the environment, physical interactions between users and things, and between users and data coming from the sensors, for example. And this is exactly where our tools and methods that we developed in our project fit in to research the different aspects of interactions. So first, the loaded dice. I have them with me, so here, if someone wants to try, we can do afterwards. But also our sensing home kit and the methods we developed for this. So while the loaded dice are mainly focused on the physical or tangible and multimodal interaction, the sensing home kit and the guested data are mainly for the data-driven interactions and involving sensors for environmental interactions. Yeah, the loaded dice shown here are development tools to investigate innovative sensor and actuator usages. I do not want to go too much into detail because while these are great tools for workshops, they are not so suitable for data-driven research in the home for field studies, for example. But this is exactly what we have done in our data-driven interaction research. And now I will introduce the motivation for this research. We see a lot of smart devices appearing in the home. For devices with camera or microphones, the problems are mostly quite obvious. They make cause for privacy, for example. But we see even more smart devices like fridges, thermostats, or heating systems, and even more to become in form of mundane objects that get smart. And these devices are equipped with simple sensors mainly. For example, for light, for temperature, humidity, or movement. I show here some examples in form of maker components. So the actual sensors often only some tiny piece of these shown of these pieces here. And simple mainly refers here to small MEMS, the amount of data that such a sensor generates, and also the complexity to handle this data. And these sensors collect data, for example, temperature and light, as shown here in this example as a time series. Actually, visualizations like this are state-of-the-art for showing simple sensor data and can be found in numerous apps and web portals. And sometimes the data in such visualizations are referred as small data, since the sensors sample only a few bytes with each measurement, and the data at all stays still manageable and usable by humans. So it's small enough for humans, in contrast to big data. But when it comes to interaction with this data, what does this what will the sensors reveal about the users and their home and their ongoing activities, for example? To experts, but to lay users as well. Are users at all interested in these sensors and sensor data? And how do they experience their interaction with this data, either in data collection or when they make use of it or when they reflect on their uses? And even an interesting question is, while these are simple sensors in a technical sense, are they also simple in terms of implications they create, in contrast, for example, to microphones or cameras? So, of course, there was already related prior work when we started. And while it's possible up to a certain degree to use automated approaches of making sense of sensor data, for example, as shown here in this example, with machine learning or other statistical approaches, we focused more on human sense making. Human sense making itself is an ethnomethodological concept of interpretation of data using the everyday knowledge that users have and the social orders on site, so in the home. And this is exactly where then situated knowledge comes in. It's also a term from sociology. That means that in the interpretation is always the context of the data included. It means as well the spatial context from the home as well as the social context where the data generated. So this was also found in prior work, especially on sensor data and the home, that human sense making in relation to a simple sensor data is possible and uses exactly this situated knowledge. And doing data interpretations this way can shed light in very detailed form on different domestic activities. This includes reasoning about place, time, events, people, routines. The people have exceptions of these routines, as well as moral order. However, these approaches that I presented here and where prior work existed had some gaps or limitations or constraints. First, often they were involving experts, at least in some aspect of the interpretation of the data, even if it was together with lay people. They mainly focused on one household at a time. So they left out all the aspects that might be interesting when it comes to collective sense making. And they did not grant users live access to the data, but this would be a requirement to enable them to do things with the data on their own to find purposes for the data. So quite some limitations, while already some kind of interesting findings. But this is where we came in with our tool and our methods and our studies. We filled these gaps and we enable making sense of sensor data in the home, as well as making use of sensor data in the home. As we are addressing also lay users, we are including the aspects of collective data work and sense making, and we allow our users to do things with the data as we gave them live and on-demand access to historic data. So this allowed them to use the data. And this created then some uses of the data or interpretation of the data like this one. That's a quite realistic example, as we will see later on. So to research, I already mentioned we created the Sensing Home Kit. And it includes everything that is needed for data collection, visualization of data, and to guide and document data interactions. And it is ready to use. That means simply plug it in. I have one here, so I just plug it in power, switched on the sensor, and it goes on. Starts collecting data, starts visualizing data. Everything is pre-configured, so very easy to use, very easy to deploy. This scheme shows our tech concept. So we use mainly existing hardware and software in form of Texas Instruments sensor tags. Here these small devices. You can see them, how big they are or how small they are. A Raspberry Pi 3, as it offers Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity, and use it together with open source software, namely Node-RED for wiring the data, InfluxDB for storing the data in form of time series, and Grafana to visualize the data on an iPad. And we wanted to use open source software and wanted the data only to store and process on our own devices. However, very soon we realized that while it's possible to create such a system somehow, it's not very suited for doing research with it. It was not reliable enough, had other limitations, so it needed a lot of enhancements to make it suitable for our research. This was the annoying part of setting this up. However, we found the Texas Instruments as sensor devices nearly optimal for what we wanted. They come with a number of simple sensors for light, for temperature, humidity, pressure, and an inertial measurement unit for detecting movement, so acceleration data, gyrometer data, and magnetometer data. And you offer wireless Bluetooth low energy connectivity and run on a small coin cell battery. Yeah, they are small enough and lightweight enough to be attached to nearly every object, to a door, to a window, to a bottle, to a glass, etc. And they are quite open as products intended for developers. So openness in hardware and software allowed us, for example, to print these nice cases here that we have that are color-coded, so easy to distinguish them, but they also made to be very flexible in terms of attachment to things. And the software allowed us to do all this performance optimizations that were needed to make them suitable. And at the time we purchased them, they were quite available and cheap. Nowadays it's a little bit different. Yeah, so with all the software modifications that I did, we are now able to do what I call senseful parameter sets. So this means parameter sets that are capable to capture all the interesting activities in the home, so they are responsive enough, but they are still not wasting too much energy from the small coin cell battery, because this was an issue. In the beginning, without all the modifications, we had only a runtime of about 1 day. It was good enough for doing workshops with the sensor kit, but not for deployments in the home. So you do not want to change the battery there every day. So with all the enhancement that I introduced, we are now on 3 weeks runtime. That's good enough for the studies that we have planned and done. And we not only created one sensor kit, we created a whole number. So in the end, over 10, because we had several deployments in parallel. And nowadays it also comes with a nicer box. So unfortunately, online audience can't see, but other guys here can see. And with the sensor kit, we run a number of use cases and studies. I feel for reference some of our studies cited where we use the sensors, and often the deployments show some kind of adaptation of the original sensor kit with a slight change here and there, but they always involve the simple sensors and enable users to interact with the data. Following on, when presenting findings and discussing them, I will mainly refer to these 3 studies here on the top with guess the data in focus. This also was the sequence how we run our main studies with some other students, projects, and workshops in parallel. And there will also be a follow-up as I just recently started a teaching learning project involving the sensor kit. More on this in the end. Yeah, in sensing home, we were mainly interested how the sensors are used in the home. So it was a very open and explorative approach to give users full control and to just ask them, do whatever you want with the sensors, try to find out what you want, place the sensor where you want, and measure the data and analyze it how you want. Then there was this guess the data study. I will explain it a little bit later on. And the third big one was the sensor station, where we, or better said, a student of us introduced a new interface for interacting with the data that allowed to combine data or to associate to data specific meaning and sense of a message that is triggered once a specific event was detected or when a specific sensor data threshold was achieved. And this was mainly used for communication purposes in shared flats, for example. So now a few slides on guess the data, starting with the methodology. Yeah, in the beginning of 10 to 14 days data collection for guess the data, we installed the sensors in 3 predefined sensor positions in participants' homes. The positions had shown in pre-studies to be promising in terms of showing a lot of ongoing activities in the home with only a few sensors. So this were the inside of the main hall door, detecting all movements, but also showing activities in the hall. The outside of the fridge door, because the fridge is a very important mundane object. And it also shows them on the outside all the ongoing activities in the kitchen, cooking, for example. And we placed the third sensor in a position to the TV set, typically in the living room. So it will detect when TV is watched and other domestic activities that are done in the living room. So then we gave the participants to the iPad and instructed the participants how to access the data and give them full access to the data for the time of the data collection to enable them to perform their own individual data work. And we also wanted the participants to reflect on their own data collection, and therefore we gave them some kind of basic instructions. So we have a booklet here. It starts with some kind of samples, and then it goes on with some kind of templates for own data work to document what was found in the data, for example. For guess the data, we sampled participants of 9 households from 2 medium-sized cities in Germany in 3 groups. And the 3 groups show differences in age, in relation of the participants, but also in spatial proximity of living of the participants of one group. So this starts from elderlies with or without a partner, over a family, down to a young couple. And from strangers over people living in the same apartment block to relatives living in close proximity of a neighborhood. When the sensor data collection was done, so after this 10 to 14 days, we collected the sensor kits as well as to create a documentation. And then our work as researchers started to do our own data work as we browsed through all the data annotations the participants created, and we selected out of this data of each group 10 to 12 data examples, showing in each one a data episode. So we selected what either the participants on their own already found interesting, documented in their booklets, or what we found as researchers interesting. And then we anonymized the data, so we removed all markings that did give a direct hint for the originating household, and created large printouts. And the printouts used the same type of visualizations the participants had already used on their iPad, just bigger. Yeah, then we invited in participants to a group discussion. This was only 1 week after the sensor data collection has ended, as we wanted to keep this duration very short, as the rememberings about the data collection are still fresh. And during the group discussions, we presented then these printouts as some kind of shared worksheets for the collective data work. And we let participants guess the data, what is shown in the data, what you can read in the data, and what they think, what the data is showing, maybe from which household it was originating. And yeah, often this was just enough as a trigger, and then whole discussion unfolded between participants. So it was only necessary from time to time to introduce some kind of another immanent question. Often also the discussions also had gone directly to this part, to implications for privacy, for example. Whenever the participants came to common sense about a specific data episode, we then moved on to the next print and so on. Following on, we transcribed all the recordings of the group discussions and performed a qualitative analysis with a focus on sensemaking and uses and discussions on privacy. This brings us to the findings. Here in the first part, I will still limit these findings to guess the data, because that was where we got our main insights on making sense of data from. And then in the second part, I will broaden this a little bit. Okay, but first to making sense of data. Yeah, in the individual data work of participants, we found a confirmation of what prior work has already proposed about how such data work goes on in these 3 steps of reading the data, speculating the course, and annotating the data. This is also what lay people can do, what they are able to do. However, we also found that to the nearly real-time access or timely access to the data and the involvement of situated knowledge, it was often less speculation, of course, but more an assigning, of course. So for example, here in this example, you see how the actual data looked like, how the participants recorded this in their booklet, and how they make a very plausible explanation why there was such a drop in temperature in the living room. So to make it short, yes, this concept of data work is also applicable for lay users, and lay users can, after a while and with some kind of practice, make sense of their own sensor data. Okay, then to the collective data work and what we have learned there. This was maybe the best part in our study, as this was really insightful to hear about the sense-making steps lively in the discussion among the participants, not so much with us, really among the participants. And this always worked as some kind of a catalyst to bring up tellings about other data interpretations that were performed but not reported in the booklets, and also data usages. Sometimes even a little bit of critical usages. Maybe the participants were too shy to report it in written form, but then in the discussions among them, they reported it. And often this also led directly to an unfolding of privacy implications the participants had in mind. So I cannot overemphasize how important these large printouts were for this purpose. So in the end, this collective data work worked as a main source of insights for us into human sense making and also in otherwise unreported uses. What we learned from this collective data work was that's often only a small step from a guess on data to an educated guess. So even if the data was anonymized, most of the data examples were correctly assigned to the originating household. So people recognized their own data there. And this was based on the use of situated knowledge. And this was then done with a backdrop on their daily routine, for example, or with exceptions from this daily routine. But sometimes, of course, there were misconceptions, false interpretations. Then something was read into the data and not very read out of the data. Yeah, this occurred. And we also found it was a collective process of coming to a common sense for such data interpretations. So even if someone got struck, others could help, and together they came to some kind of an intersubjective interpretation with some kind of intersubjective plausibility. And then when this was found, the data visualizations worked as a proof that this interpretation should be plausible. Yeah, we also found that the participants easily become aware that they deal with sensitive data because they recognized either before already in their own data work or then at least in the collective data work that this type of data reveals a lot of private aspects of their life. So for example, the attendance at home, when they come and they leave, domestic activities, watching TV, cooking, shaking, baking, etc. The use of rooms and objects like the fridge, but also that the data gives hints for example, for health issues like disturbed sleep rhythm, nocturia. So if light is switched on in the hall in the night 12 times, there's something going on. And from the findings that were really done, they came also to speculations about possible sensor usages. For example, to detect the sexual activities if the sensor is mounted to the bed, for example. So something we had not, and that we did not done. So this was pure speculation, but it was also brought up in this type of discussions that were going on. At the same time, the discussion were going on, the participants realized, oh, wait, I can not only make sense of my own data, I can also make a little bit sense, at least, on the data of others and finding there this sensitive data parts. So now we'll broaden the findings a little bit more from the making sense to the making of use of the data and to the implications we learn from them in the end. Yeah, when it comes to the use of data, we found often very obvious uses that we had expected. So these were, for example, the use of the humidity sensor for damp prevention, temperature sensor or light sensor for energy saving. So how long was light switched on? Is my room too high temperature or something like this? But also to find, for example, optimal light conditions for reading. And then what I was surprised, we found a lot of creative uses, especially in the first explorative study of sensing home. So for example, one participant used a sensor in his aquarium. They are not waterproof, but he still managed to detect the level of water in there because he measured just the reflected light from the surface of the aquarium, and it differs with the filling height of the water. Then there was a sensor placed in front of the TV set, and the participants wanted to know, when he watched the same episode of IT Crowd, for example, a second time, whether it will show in the end a similar pattern in the data, and yes, it did. And participants mounted the sensors to pads or place it in the sleeping place of mats to pads to monitor their activities in sleep rhythms, etc. And especially in sensor station, we also found creative uses in the terms that the sensors were used as means of communication. So if something was detected, for example, there was sunrise detected, then a message to all dwellers was sent, "Good morning." Yeah. We also found as examples of use of the data as evidence and proof. So then this data was used actively to problematize, for example, wasteful behavior. So here, like in this example, that the light was switched on for too long and unnecessarily. And it was, of course, used with a specific purpose to stop this wasteful behavior or to achieve a change in habits. But so it was mainly to shame and educate also other peoples. And we also found this in the sensor case, sensor station deployment, when the sensor data was used as some kind of reminders to separate the waste correctly. So here in this example, to put on the bio-waste in the bio-waste container. So some of these uses are already to be mentioned as questionable uses of data. But we also found really unquestionable bad uses of the data, misuses if you want. For example, for surveillance. So this vignette here illustrates this use of the sensor data as means of surveillance. It is what the wife reported in some kind of replayed dialogue that was done with her spouse. Yeah, so it was relatively funny because he was away and said, "Oh yes, I will go into the garden." I go immediately into the garden. I don't know where I was, but 4 hours later I came back and he said, "I've been in the garden all the time." And there I alerted and said, "This cannot be true because the apartment door only opened at 17:30. And he said, "Really?" I said, "What did you do?" "I think I was laying on the sofa for an hour and slept." I said, "Yes, but you were not in the garden." And he said, "Did you monitor me?" Yes, this was funny. I did not explain to him how it works. So the participant used the sensor data to surveil her spouse and to convict him of lying. The information surplus that the sensor data provided was at least twice used for intentional lateral surveillance of other household family members, and it can be considered as surveillance as we found intentionally asymmetrical access and use of the data, so that the sensor data became a power differential in the families. Yet only a small size of participants that we sampled and a short time of use show that these users will show up. We have to expect them as misuses when the sensor data is used. However, in terms of surveillance, we also found an interesting ambivalent evaluation, whether it is surveillance or not. So when we directly asked the participants whether they felt surveilled during this time of sensor data collection, despite they know that we also had access to the data, that the data can reveal sensitive information about them, that they are able to do the interpretations as we should also do the interpretations, and they even had in mind maybe some kind of surveillance scenarios and even performed surveillance scenarios. They did not feel surveilled by us. Nevertheless, they answered on these questions, they still want to have access over control over who gets access to the data. And this brings us to the discussion. So I guess some of these are at least some kind of wicked implications, especially for privacy. And I formulated these so that in negation of this formulation of even if no picks up some assumptions from either prior work or even that we had when we started, and also some obvious but not so simple aspects. So we had, for example, a Kai workshop paper 5 years ago where we stated something like the big brother is not only watching you, he's also watching your humidity like this. Okay, let's explain how I had intended this with this, even if no. For the following slides, I first relate back to the relevant findings and then propose some points for discussion. For example, sensor data is even critical for the privacy of the people, even if there's no complex sensor is involving, and even if no personal data is directly involved. And when looking back on these findings, that we found simple sensor data can actually be a lot of sensitive information, that lay people are able to do this interpretation if data is just small enough, and even that participants became aware that is private aspects of their life that is shown in the sensor data. And the use of situated knowledge allowed this for them. We have to come to the conclusion or the discussion point that we should do the same kind of iterations that we normally do for the deployment of microphones or cameras in the home, or should also do for simple sensor data. And one reason is that even simple sensor data can become personal data or person-related data, at least, the moment it is possible to associate that data to a specific individual. And this is, for example, in a household of only 2 or 3 people, possible. And so it becomes very important that data as well as context for this type of data is handled carefully. Then another here assumption-based negation is even critical if no AI or machine learning is involved. So it is not necessary to have an AI or machine learning to make sense of the sensor data for these people. There is not a too big gap for interpretation. It is doable. Either machine learning or AI is not used, it might be a very good approach to use it actually in the opposite direction, to get people away from the data, to allow only these machines or the algorithms to do the interpretations for only limited purposes that are predefined. And maybe even directly here on these devices, so that they are not sending out any longer raw data, but send out only maybe a count of openings over a specific time that does not reveal the exact timestamps of openings. So I have summarized all these points on an extra slide titled Managing Data on Context, where I present these ideas or possible approaches. But let's go on with this, even if no objective true interpretation is possible or given.
We've got some time for Q&A.
40 minutes now? Yeah. Okay, so it's easy to go from a guess to an educated guess when we use this situated knowledge. We have seen, yeah, there are misconceptions, false interpretations, and there's a very critical point that if in the subjective seen true interpretations come together with data as proof, data is easily taken as objective. And this is highly problematic because often people are tempted to go from a speculation without data to a speculation with data. And this is when they are pursued to do readings or interpretations of the data that's actually not possible based on the data. Then something is maybe read into the data instead of read out of the data. And users need to be aware of this fact that not every plausible interpretation, even as in the subjective accepted, is actually necessarily true in an objective sense. Because sensor data, it does not necessarily speak on itself in every case. So maybe the door was not opened, maybe only wind shake it hard enough on the door that it might look like some kind of opening on the first view at least. Yeah, then this point of the big brother. What we found was actual lateral surveillance within household and family members, sometimes even intentional. So this means in the end, even if no big brother is involved, there will be a surveillance. The big brother is not even needed. So big brother might not even have the situated knowledge that close relative has. So it's right here, like with AI and machine learning, the opposite that you should consider. So sharing your data within close social or spatial proximity might be the problem in the end, because the people there have the situated knowledge to make the data critical. And this leads to this somehow striking discussion point. You should care more about somebody in your family or household than about an anonymous big brother out there. And even if it's not a member of your family, for example, a neighbor or something, I wouldn't share easily the data with them because they have also additional situated knowledge. They can watch on your window when the light is switched on, and then they can, through this, take this also to interpretations for other existing data. So maybe there is not such thing like a safe distance. But it's very important to understand all these spatial and social context aspects in the end. This also relates then back to the management of data and context. And what is about this not existing feeling of being surveyed?
I think we really have to stop soon. So is that the last slide?
Not yet, but nearly. And
because we have to end at 3, because people will perhaps have gone to other 53.
Yeah, okay, just this one, and then I will skip to the conclusion. Yeah, when it comes to this special feeling of not being surveilled, it was a special case, I guess, because we as researchers are seen as very trustworthy people, having only good intentions. We are doing research, right? But it might also be a starting point for some kind of third-party handling for data, and what we also got out of our discussion points. For example, to have a trusted third party like the Red Cross that are already in caregiving to take data for these purposes of caregiving. Okay, now I will skip the next one slides and will come to my conclusion and takeaways. So yes, people are interested in sensor data from their homes. They can make sense of the sensor data. They will make use of the sensor data for the good, questionable, and maybe even some kind of misuses. And right, this making of use and making of sense will in the end lead to implications for privacy for this simple sensor data. So simple sensor data in the home, a simple sensor in the home and the data are not by default harmless. Now I take
Brilliant.
questions.
Well, thank you so much. There's a round of physical applause in the room, virtual applause online. I know that Mark is already in the room. A question for you. So we will collect that and any of. Well, actually, probably if you're online anyway. And anyone who is online, you can either raise your hand or post a question into the chat. So, Mark.
Yeah, so okay, good. So yeah, so you made really interesting research to start off with. Just to let's start with that. So you made the comparison to perhaps sort of more sensitive types of data like video data and audio data. And sort of made this comparison between these types of data and these more sort of anonymous types of sensor data that you're collecting. But then a few of you have gone through this process of sort of collective sense making around this more anonymous data, and people can actually start to attribute events and things that happen. Yeah. But I mean, the thing I sort of challenged that is that one of the things you stated was the importance of, for example, printing out these graphs. There does seem to be like a lot more work involved there in trying to make sense of this data compared to sort of audio data and video data. So how do you? Yeah, I'd just be interesting to sort of hear your thoughts around the sort of the additional work that's required in order to make sense of data.
So this additional work was mainly done for our research purposes to perform this method. If participants use the data, for example, on the iPad in this line graphs that are already prepared, so it's not really much effort. It's just browsing to the data to see what was in the last 10 hours, 12 hours, yesterday. It's not so much effort.
There were participants though that said that they generated insights that they hadn't generated through looking at the iPad because it was printed out, because they were going through this collaborative approach. So is there something that is slightly special about the collaborative approach and seeing it in a very different format compared to seeing it individually, or trying to make sense of this individually on a smaller device? I guess it's we use it as some kind of a special step to bring the participants to talk about data. So this is, I believe, something completely different from you use it on your own because you have some kind of interest and you want to use the data for a specific purpose. But this was nothing. We were standing in their homes and looked over their shoulder. So we had not this possibility. We had to use this collective element of sense making to bring also up these users, and these users exist.
I have also a question with regards, I mean, of course, I'm really interested in that intimate partner or intimate household surveillance that you touch upon, as you probably could envision. And I just wondered, like, the example you gave was funny in some elements, but creepy at the same time.
It was, yeah.
Did you have only, so you did not, so, you know, the way you sampled people, you did not know how the household dynamics were, right? So I'm wondering, was there ever a consideration put that you potentially exacerbate internal dynamic in the households through giving someone in the household power over another person?
I guess you now aim a little bit for our ethics that we have as researchers, for example, that we should not cause such trouble maybe that throughout technology. Of course, you're right. We should not do this, but in the end, this were the really interesting findings. And if you look, for example, for other sensors, everybody can buy some similar sensors in the electronic market. So go to Kurze or something like this, buy some sensors and start collecting data in your home. Do you believe they will ask their other? So we just showed how users will actually show or will be.
If I can follow up, okay, I mean, like, I fully understand, you know, the products are available, but you gave them, like, it's easier if researchers come and give you a whole toolkit, a box to make that happen. So I just wondered, A, has there been any really negative outcomes of it? Because the example was kind of jokingly. And B, were actually the people allowed to keep those devices because you don't know how they continue to use them, right? So the first one is, were there any negative ones?
No, luckily there were no really negative outcomes in meanings, for example, that partnerships break up or something like this. No, we are not aware of this. We had not caused real trouble. Luckily.
Hopefully, for now.
No, as far as we know, we had later on contact with the participants and was everything okay.
And were they allowed to keep the things?
No, they were not allowed because we moved on with the sensors to the next study.
Okay.
But to come back to this point, yes, of course, we became aware in the end that there was a possibility, given that our sensors or our installation and easy access to the sensor data would have, of course, real-life implications for participants, like such breaking ups of partnerships. And nowadays, we might even think twice if we would do it in the same way again.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it's great that you have that like insight as a consequence. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Albrecht, for a really interesting talk. Thank you everyone for being online. The video will also remain on YouTube, and so more people can watch it in the future. And everyone, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Albrecht, for joining us at UCL in person and online. And see you all very soon. Thank you.
Goodbye.